Ryan, who had been watching the exchange with amusement, found Shiren's argument fascinating. As Rai stormed out in frustration, Shiren exhaled in relief, feeling as if he had narrowly avoided a confrontation. Ryan couldn't contain his laughter, praising Shiren for standing up to Rai and for presenting a perspective that left Rai dumbfounded. Shiren couldn't help but smile at Ryan's enthusiastic response. Despite the heavy topic, the conversation had taken a turn that felt refreshing. Shiren had managed to make his point, and for once, he had not backed down. Ryan seemed impressed by Shiren's ability to navigate such a difficult situation, and Shiren, in turn, felt a sense of satisfaction in expressing his beliefs. Months passed, and the task of relocating the library was finally completed ahead of schedule. Shiren had spent countless hours sorting through books, categorizing them, and organizing the vast collection. Timurin, the head butler, was pleased with the early completion of the task, as were the workers who had been involved in the process. They spoke of the relief they felt in finally being able to address the neglected books, many of which had been forgotten for years. The workers even discussed the possibility of extending Shiren's contract, but Timurin swiftly shut down the idea, telling them to focus on their work. Shiren, however, didn't mind. He had known that his time at the library would eventually come to an end, and now, with the final book in his hands and the shelves completely empty, he felt a mix of emotions. It was strange, almost surreal, to look around the library and realize that it was all done. The quiet hum of accomplishment settled within him, and he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come in the past months. As he sat in the now empty library, Shiren heard Ryan's familiar voice. He looked up to see his friend entering with a bright smile, eager to congratulate him on completing his work. Shiren, holding the last book from the library, nodded in acknowledgement. Ryan was clearly impressed by the fact that Shiren had managed to finish the monumental task of cataloging the entire collection. Ryan's excitement was contagious, and Shiren felt a sense of pride in his achievement. Yet, it was in this moment that Shiren, in a rare show of openness, asked Ryan if he could visit his home. The request surprised Ryan, who had never imagined that Shiren would be interested in spending time at his mansion. For months, Shiren had kept their friendship private, and this unexpected request caught Ryan off guard. He had always assumed that Shiren had been distant, but now, the invitation felt like a small step toward a deeper friendship. After a moment of hesitation, Ryan agreed, happy to show Shiren around his home. When they arrived at the Ojin's mansion, Shiren was taken aback by the sheer size and quietness of the estate. The mansion stood tall, with sprawling grounds that seemed to stretch on forever. Shiren felt a sense of unease as they walked through the front gate, wondering if he was out of place in such an opulent environment. Ryan, noticing Shiren's discomfort, reassured him that his family would not be home until late afternoon, which explained the eerie silence. As they walked deeper into the mansion, Shiren couldn't help but wonder how someone like Ryan, who was so down to earth and carefree, could live in such a grand place. The contrast between Ryan's humble nature and his lavish surroundings was striking. Ryan led Shiren to his room, which, to Shiren's surprise, was not as extravagant as the rest of the mansion. It was a modest space tucked away at the end of a long corridor. Shiren joked that it looked more like a training center than a bedroom, but he couldn't help but appreciate the simplicity of it. It was a far cry from the grandeur of the mansion's other rooms. As they settled into the room, Ryan challenged Shiren to a card game, but quickly became frustrated after losing several rounds. Shiren, ever observant, noticed small habits in Ryan's play that gave away his cards. When Ryan accused him of using Spirit Zone powers, Shiren calmly explained that it was simply a matter of observation. By focusing on the bigger picture and not obsessing over small details, he was able to predict Ryan's actions. Ryan, intrigued by Shiren's approach, wondered if it could help him awaken his own schema, a concept that he had been struggling to understand. Shiren, with a knowing smile, assured him that this method had helped him enter his own spirit zone, though he wasn't sure if it would work the same way for Ryan. As the game ended and Ryan fell asleep in his chair, Shiren's curiosity led him to pick up a book from Ryan's table. He had grown tired of reading history books and was eager to explore fiction for a change. However, just as he was about to dive into the book, he heard the soft sound of piano music drifting from another part of the mansion. Intrigued, Shiren followed the sound and found himself standing before a grand piano, where Ryan's older sister, Rina Ojint, was playing. Shiren had heard of her before, but seeing her in person was a different experience. Rina was a professional pianist, and her playing was mesmerizing. Shiren, unsure of what to do, complimented her performance, though he quickly realized that she was a master of her craft, likely using schema to guide her playing just as she did in other areas of her life. When Rihanna turned to look at him, she casually asked if he had ever played the piano before, and Cheyenne, feeling somewhat out of his depth, admitted that he had never played. Rihanna, with a mischievous smile, offered to teach him, inviting him to sit beside her on the piano bench. Cheyenne, caught off guard by her sudden invitation, hesitated. He had never imagined himself in such an intimate setting with Rihanna, especially given that Ryan had warned him about her sharp personality. Nevertheless, Cheyenne knew that he couldn't back out now, so he slowly made his way to the bench, wondering how this unexpected encounter would unfold. Cheyenne had always been cautious, perhaps overly so, in environments that teemed with power and expectation. And this mansion, with its opulent decor and rigid hierarchies, certainly fit that description. Despite the warm invitation from Rihanna, the eldest daughter of the family, he couldn't shake the sense that something more was at play here. Rihanna, known for her cold professionalism and intricate, almost calculative approach to everything, was someone not to be taken lightly. She used a concept known as schema in her performances, a term that Cheyenne understood only as a form of mental structure designed to organize and predict outcomes in complex situations. While he had not yet witnessed it firsthand, he knew that it was part of the very foundation of who she was. But it was her brother, Ryan, who had warned him of her true nature. Ryan, ever the playful, unpredictable force, had told Cheyenne that Rihanna, despite her poised exterior, was not to be trusted, at least not entirely. He said she had the worst personality in the family, and Cheyenne was inclined to believe him. So, when Rihanna asked him if he could play the piano, Cheyenne had no idea how to respond. His mind raced, a part of him wanting to refuse, but before he could make a decision, Rihanna had already gestured to the empty space beside her on the bench. "Will you sit here?" she had asked, her tone light, though there was a quiet insistence in her words. Cheyenne, though shocked by the invitation, found himself unable to refuse. What else could he do? How many opportunities would he get to sit at a grand piano in a mansion like this, with Rihanna, the lady of the house, offering to teach him? He sat down beside her, feeling more like a subject of some unseen test than a student of music. Rihanna began to explain the basics, her voice patient and calm as she guided him through the piano keys. "These keys are do, re, mi," she said, tapping each one with her fingers, and then pointing to the symbols on the sheet music. Cheyenne tried to follow along, pressing down on the keys as instructed. A strange sensation ran through his fingers as the sound reverberated, a kind of resonance that felt almost spiritual. He couldn't help but marvel at the way the notes seemed to linger in the air, an ephemeral yet powerful presence. Rihanna, observing his reaction, offered a smile of approval. "Oh, that's a good start," she said, as though surprised that he could manage even this much. Cheyenne's mind was swirling with thoughts. What was he doing here? Why was she so insistent on teaching him something so simple? But there was something about the way the music moved under his fingers that drew him in, almost as if it were calling to him. So, when he asked her if he could try playing a piece, she agreed, though her smile was tinged with an understanding that he might not get it right. As he pressed down on the keys, his fingers stumbling through the chords, Cheyenne knew it wouldn't sound perfect. He was just a beginner, after all. Yet, something within him clicked. He continued to play, each note wrong, but there was a certain flow to the way his fingers moved, a kind of rhythm that felt more instinctive than learned. Rihanna watched in awe, her initial skepticism melting away as Cheyenne continued, not hesitating once as he pressed the keys, each chord slightly out of place yet somehow fitting in its own strange way. To Rihanna, it was as though Cheyenne was not playing music at all, but rather channeling the very essence of it, as though his fingers were guided by something beyond the simple technique she had taught him. The more he played, the more it seemed like he was imitating the feel of her performance from earlier, only he was doing it wrong, but with such precision and confidence that it almost felt right. She couldn't help but be fascinated by this strange phenomenon. As Cheyenne lost himself in the music, the sounds growing more fluid and connected, he began to feel a strange sense of unity with the piano, as though the instrument had become an extension of his own being. It wasn't quite like playing in the traditional sense, but something deeper was happening. His movements were now more deliberate, each note becoming clearer, more defined. He felt the music as though it were a living thing, something that resonated in his very bones. Rihanna, meanwhile, watched in silent wonderment. She couldn't quite place it. Was this truly the same person who had struggled with the simplest of chords? Or was there something more to him that even he didn't understand? Before Rihanna could fully process her thoughts, Ryan's voice broke through the trance-like atmosphere, yelling from across the room. He called his sister a witch gremlin for making such a racket, demanding she stop immediately. The moment of peaceful contemplation was shattered, and Cheyenne was left staring awkwardly at Ryan, who had just caught sight of him sitting next to his sister at the piano. Ryan seemed confused at first, then curious, asking Cheyenne why he was sitting there, completely oblivious to the tension between them. Cheyenne, caught off guard, stammered, unsure of how to explain himself, especially when Ryan's teasing escalated. The teasing was just the tip of the iceberg, and soon enough, the whole situation had spiraled into chaos. Ryan, ever the troublemaker, began to dig deeper, making jokes about Cheyenne and Rione's relationship. Cheyenne, growing increasingly embarrassed, found himself defending his relationship with Ryan, though his irritation was clear. Meanwhile, Rihanna seemed completely unfazed, rolling with the teasing and dismissing her brother's antics with ease. Despite Ryan's obnoxious behavior, Rihanna maintained her composure, offering Cheyenne a smile of reassurance. She even said something that caught him off guard, telling him that if Ryan considered them friends, that was good enough for her. Cheyenne, though confused by her nonchalant attitude, couldn't help but feel a strange sense of comfort from her words. Still, he remained wary. The conversation shifted to more pressing matters, with Rihanna explaining that she was picking up Ryan for a certification test. Cheyenne was taken aback. This test, she explained, was no ordinary examination. It was a rigorous certification for mages and swordsmen, highly coveted across the kingdom and beyond. Few passed the test each year, and it was clear that Rione's brother was no ordinary person. She had a different level of expectation for him, one that was rooted in his potential and the legacy of their family. Cheyenne, still reeling from the awkwardness of the conversation, couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and apprehension. This family, and especially Rione, operated on a level he didn't fully understand. As Rihanna left to prepare for dinner, she casually mentioned that it had been nice meeting Cheyenne and suggested they meet again. Cheyenne, feeling a mixture of confusion and gratitude, watched her leave, wondering if he would ever see her again. After all, he was leaving the mansion the following day. But before he could leave the conversation behind, his curiosity got the better of him. He asked Ryan about his sister's personal life, wondering if she had a boyfriend. Immediately, Ryan, with his characteristic mischievous grin, seized upon this and ran off to tell his sister. Cheyenne, mortified, tried to take back his question, but it was too late. Ryan had already shouted it across the mansion, and Cheyenne found himself in the midst of yet another embarrassing situation. Rione, upon hearing Ryan's shout, took it all in stride, laughing off the comment, and reassuring the maids that it was nothing more than playful teasing. However, Cheyenne felt humiliated, realizing that he had unintentionally caused a stir. As he tried to cover up his mistake, the two butlers observing from a distance exchanged glances. One of them seemed to recognize Cheyenne's name, recalling something that had happened recently. He quickly relayed the information to the head butler, Louis, who, upon hearing the name, seemed to remember something important. Cheyenne's association with Ryan had caught someone's attention, and this was not the end of the story. The next day, as snow fell softly outside, Ryan was deep in his sword training, pushing himself to the limit. His master watched, concerned, as Ryan continued to train relentlessly, his focus intense but bordering on obsession. The master had seen this before. Ryan's determination to be the best sometimes led him to dangerous extremes. Just as Ryan reached his limit, a butler arrived with urgent news from Rione. Cheyenne, the temporary butler, was in grave danger. Ryan, momentarily stunned, couldn't understand why this was happening. The butler explained that Cheyenne's relationship with Ryan had somehow put him at risk, and Ryan's concern grew. He immediately decided to go to his father, hoping to explain the situation and prevent Cheyenne from facing any consequences. At the Ogent's mansion, the family head sat at the center of a tense gathering, his eyes filled with fury. Cheyenne, still kneeling before him, could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The family head's words were sharp and unforgiving as he declared that Cheyenne would be executed. Cheyenne, stunned, felt the ground slip from beneath him. Everything had spiraled out of control so quickly, and he had no idea how to salvage the situation. His fate was no longer in his hands. It was now up to the whims of the family and their ruthless sense of justice. The future seemed uncertain, and Cheyenne, with his heart pounding in his chest, awaited whatever came next. Cheyenne, the butler working on a contract, was in immediate danger of his life. The family head had just learned of his friendship with the young master, Ryan, and now Cheyenne faced the grim sentence of execution. The news of his fate spread like wildfire through the mansion, sparking whispers and hushed conversations among the servants. Some were confused, questioning how this could happen, while others criticized Cheyenne for daring to form such a bond with someone of noble blood. In the midst of the tension, Ryan rushed to his father, determined to plead for Cheyenne's life. He was certain that if he spoke on his behalf, his father would understand and perhaps grant forgiveness. But when Ryan arrived, sword in hand, ready to confront the family head, he was met with a cold and resolute response from his father, who was not moved by Ryan's protests. The family head, his face contorted with rage, emphasized the severity of the situation, explaining how the butler had broken the unspoken rules that governed the relationship between commoners and nobles. It was not just a matter of personal friendship but a question of family honor and the delicate balance that sustained their position in society. As Shiren knelt before the family head, his fate seemed sealed. But he didn't beg for mercy. Instead, he asked a single question. What would happen to Ryan if he were executed? His calm demeanor in the face of death surprised everyone in the room, and whispers of disbelief circulated among the servants. The family head was incensed, berating Shiren for daring to question the consequences of his actions. He insisted that nobles were above reproach and that friendships with commoners were not only impractical but dangerous. He dismissed the very notion that a noble like Ryan could have a true, meaningful relationship with someone like Shiren. It was all too clear that the family's reputation could not afford such associations. Despite this, Ryan, resolute in his belief that Shiren was his friend, refused to back down. He was willing to risk everything to protect him, even if it meant defying his father. His emotions were raw, his determination unwavering, and the conflict between father and son was now more than just a disagreement. It was a test of loyalty, honor, and identity. Ryan's internal struggle intensified as he considered his next steps. The weight of the decision hung heavily on his shoulders, but his resolve grew stronger. The teacher, who had once guided him, had imparted crucial lessons that Ryan now realized were essential. He had been taught that the measure of a person was not only in their actions but also in their relationships, and that true friendship was a bond that transcended social status. Ryan knew that if he were to prove his loyalty to Shiren, it wouldn't be enough to simply argue. It had to be demonstrated with action. His father's harsh words echoed in his mind, but Ryan had made up his mind. He would not abandon his friend, no matter the cost. When faced with the ultimate challenge, Ryan raised his sword, not in defiance of his father, but as a testament to his unshakable belief in their friendship. The family head was taken aback by Ryan's willingness to stand against him, the patriarch of the house, in such a way. The atmosphere in the room thickened with tension as the family head's anger boiled over. He accused Ryan of being immature, of clinging to a misguided sense of loyalty that had no place in the world of nobility. He mocked Ryan's belief in friendship, suggesting that the young master was simply using a commoner to elevate himself, to make himself feel better. But Ryan stood firm, refusing to let his father's insults shake his conviction. He declared that Shiren was no mere servant or tool. He was his equal, and a person far more deserving of respect than his father could ever understand. The family head's frustration grew, and he turned to Shiren, demanding to know if he was the one who had filled Ryan's head with such foolish notions. But Shiren remained silent, resolute in his decision not to defend himself. He had always known that this moment would come, the moment when his loyalty to Ryan would be tested. He had accepted that his life could be the price of their friendship, and if that was what it took, he would face it without regret. As Ryan prepared to stand by his friend, his emotions surged. He could feel the weight of the entire family's expectations on him, but he no longer cared. He would not let fear dictate his actions. The bond between him and Shiren was something he would not abandon, even if it meant losing his position, his status, and even his family. The family head, seeing Ryan's unyielding resolve, finally snapped, ordering the execution of Shiren without hesitation. But before anyone could act, the situation took an unexpected turn. From above, the family's grandfather watched the unfolding drama with a mix of amusement and disbelief. He found the spectacle fascinating, unable to resist the thrill of seeing the younger generation clash so intensely. The tension in the room was palpable, and yet, for a brief moment, there was a sense of inevitability about the events that were about to unfold. The outcome was unclear, but one thing was certain. This was not just a battle between a father and his son, it was a clash of ideals, a fight for what truly mattered in a world where power, status, and loyalty often came at a steep price. Ryan had always been a loyal and passionate individual, yet the weight of his decisions was becoming more evident with every passing moment. The moment he declared his unwavering commitment to Shiren, it felt as if the world around them had frozen in place. With a sword stabbed firmly into the ground, Ryan made a declaration that would forever change the course of his life. His gesture, though dramatic, was not just about loyalty. It was a public acknowledgement of the bond he shared with Shiren, a bond that defied the constraints of nobility, status, and family expectations. The declaration to become Shiren's sword was more than a vow, it was a declaration of solidarity, a pledge of protection and friendship, even in the face of overwhelming familial opposition. Shirene, in his usual composed manner, struggled with the weight of Ryan's decision. The implications were not lost on him, and yet there was an undeniable sense of guilt that coursed through his veins. To have someone, especially a noble like Ryan, swear an oath to him was a monumental gesture. But Shirene knew the consequences that such actions would have on Ryan's future. While he felt honored, a part of him wished that Ryan hadn't made such a reckless commitment. Shirene's hesitation, however, was not born from doubt about their friendship but from the recognition of the burdens that Ryan was now carrying. Burdens that he, Shirene, was partly responsible for. Ryan, with his youth and idealism, was prepared to face the storm, but Shirene could not help but feel a sense of responsibility for the chaos that had been set into motion. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear that Ryan's family, particularly his grandfather, was not pleased with the direction things were taking. The patriarch of the Ogent family, Clumph Ogent, had expected a certain decorum and order, but instead, he was witnessing a display of raw emotion and an uncharacteristic display of defiance. The Ogent family was a house built on tradition and hierarchy, and Ryan's public oath to a commoner, a future mage at that, was seen as a threat to their carefully cultivated image. Clumph, however, saw the situation in a different light. He recognized the depth of the bond between the two young men, something that transcended politics and the expectations placed on them by their lineage. It was a bond forged in the fires of loyalty, friendship, and mutual respect, which, in his eyes, could not be easily dismissed. The family members, particularly Rihanna and Rai, had different perspectives on the situation. Rihanna, while initially taken aback by the declaration, quickly grasped the gravity of the situation. She had seen something in Shirene that others might have missed, a potential for greatness, both as a person and as an individual capable of changing the dynamics of the Ogent family. She had been quick to support Shirene, knowing that his talents, especially in swordsmanship, could be an asset to their family's future. Rai, on the other hand, was more concerned with the political fallout. His disinterest in the personal aspects of the matter was clear, yet he couldn't escape the reality of his family's expectations. He, too, had a future to consider, and the potential disruption caused by Ryan's decision was a complication he didn't need. However, it was the deputy butler, Timurin, who had the longest experience with Shirene, and his testimony seemed to weigh heavily in the matter. Timurin, a man of few words but great insight, had always valued efficiency and discipline. His opinion of Shirene was not clouded by emotion, yet he couldn't deny the young man's exceptional ability to accomplish the tasks set before him. Shirene's efficiency in completing the monumental task of organizing 10,000 books ahead of schedule was a testament to his discipline and intelligence. It was clear that Shirene's talents were undeniable, and his worth extended beyond mere appearances or preconceived notions. The decision to endorse the relationship between Shirene and Ryan was not an easy one. But the more the family members spoke, the more the possibility of a deeper bond between them seemed inevitable. Clump's laughter at Ryan's impetuousness and Shirene's steadfast refusal to back down was a rare moment of levity in what was otherwise a tense confrontation. The grandfather, despite his initial displeasure, came to understand that Ryan's actions were driven by something genuine, something more profound than familial duty or tradition. Ryan had chosen to place his trust in Shirene, and that trust, in turn, was something that Clumph had to respect. As the atmosphere shifted from one of tension to cautious acceptance, the family had, though still reluctant, acknowledged that there was little more to be done. The declaration of the Knight's Oath had sealed the bond between Ryan and Shirene, and it was not a decision that could be easily undone. In a final gesture of approval, Clumph ordered that Shirene's parents be brought to the family estate, signaling that the matter had been settled, at least for now. Ryan, for his part, was both relieved and exhilarated. The eyes of his family, especially his grandfather, had seen through his impulsive actions, but they had also recognized the value in what he had done. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, Ryan felt as though he had taken the first step towards something greater. Shirene, still reeling from the implications of the Knight's Oath, could not help but feel a mixture of gratitude and pressure. Ryan's commitment was a powerful statement, but it also placed Shirene in the heart of the Ogent family's future plans. Rihanna, meanwhile, was quick to bring new information to light. She had managed to leverage Shirene's abilities to ensure that both he and Ryan would be enrolled in the Kaizen Swordsmanship Academy. It was clear that her intentions were aligned with the family's desire to secure Ryan's future, but Shirene was left feeling conflicted. He had never planned on becoming involved in the world of nobility or swordsmanship. His true passion lay in magic, yet the weight of his promise to Ryan and the expectations placed upon him by the Ogent family could not be ignored. Ryan, still lying on the floor from his earlier exertions, reacted to Rione's plans with frustration. He had hoped that his bond with Shiren would remain untainted by political machinations, but it seemed that both of them were now bound to the same destiny. Shiren's potential as a mage had not been lost on Rione, but the family's focus on swordsmanship and political influence would likely overshadow his true aspirations. Despite Ryan's earlier proclamation of loyalty, Shiren was beginning to understand that their bond might not be enough to shield them from the forces of destiny and family expectations. The future, though bright in some ways, was fraught with challenges, and as the reality of their situation began to sink in, both Shiren and Ryan knew that their journey together had only just begun. Shiren's recent display of skill in a sparring match had surprised everyone around him, including Rione, who, though always perceptive, had never anticipated just how capable he was. His ability to read Ryan's movements in battle, seemingly through an innate sense linked to his high-density spirit zone, was extraordinary. Riona marveled at how Shiren had managed to maintain such intense concentration during the fight, all the while holding a sword. It was a rare ability, one that many people, especially those in noble circles, could only dream of possessing. She had heard that the higher one's level of concentration, the more solid their spirit zone became, but seeing it in action was a different matter altogether. Yet, despite this, she couldn't help but notice how shy and humble Shiren seemed, a quality that she thought might hinder him when it came to forming relationships, particularly romantic ones. This reflection led her to think about his future, and she quickly made a decision to speak to her grandfather about what path to take next for Shiren. Rione's mind was made up. Shiren would need to attend a swordsmanship school, and she would ensure that Ryan, too, would be part of this. Ryan, upon hearing this, was initially confused and a bit startled. What would happen to his relationship with his master, Teacher Kite? He had not expected this sudden shift, but Riona reassured him that Teacher Kite had already decided to end their contract, and would be bidding Ryan farewell the following morning. This news left Ryan deeply moved and a bit melancholic, as he thought about the time spent with his teacher, reflecting on the bond they had formed through their training. Meanwhile, a butler entered Ryan's room with important news. Shiren's family had arrived and were waiting in the reception room. It was a moment that Shiren had eagerly anticipated, and he wasted no time in rushing out to meet them, his excitement evident in every step. The butlers, ever the professionals, reminded him to be careful on the steep stairs, though Shiren, ever humble, tried to downplay the situation, assuring them that he was not yet a noble and was comfortable with their familiar manner of speaking to him. However, the butlers, ever loyal to their station, insisted that they could not afford to disregard formalities. When Shiren reached the reception room, his eyes immediately found his parents, and without a moment's hesitation, he rushed to them, embracing them tightly. The reunion was emotional, with all three shedding tears of joy as they held each other. Shiren was struck by how frail and thin his parents had become during his time away. He realized that they must have endured a great deal of hardship, particularly worrying about him and fearing the worst. His mother, noticing his concern, assured him that they had been managing well enough, though his father, ever the pragmatist, questioned why he hadn't simply returned home after finishing his duties. He seemed to believe that something must be keeping Shiren away, something that Shiren wasn't telling them. Shiren, however, reassured them, explaining that he had been given a unique and exciting opportunity, though his parents struggled to grasp the magnitude of what he was describing. As Shiren spoke, explaining everything that had happened since his arrival at the Ogent household, his father found it increasingly difficult to believe. The idea that his son had befriended a noble young master, sworn an oath as a knight, and been given permission to stay close to him was simply too much for him to wrap his mind around. He shook Shiren by the shoulders, demanding to know if someone was pulling his leg. It wasn't possible, he thought. No one from a family like theirs could be treated with such respect and kindness by nobility. Shiren, however, remained steadfast in his words, insisting that everything he said was true. Not long after, the family head, Biscoff Ogent, arrived in the reception room to greet Shiren's parents. His presence alone seemed to amplify the surreal nature of the situation for Shiren's family, as they tried to make sense of the fact that they were standing before such an influential man. The family head introduced himself with dignity, and soon after, Ryan and Riona also presented themselves with respect. Shiren's parents, in their state of shock, bowed in response, overwhelmed by the honor being shown to them. They found themselves in awe of the Ogent family's status, but the reality of it all had not fully sunk in. They could not fathom why such important people would take an interest in their son, a simple woodsman's child. The family head explained that while it might seem strange, Ojin's policies were rooted in militarism, and for them, a knight's oath was an oath that could not be broken. Shiren's talent, particularly his spirit zone, was not something that could simply be earned through effort. It was a rare gift that demanded respect and recognition. He further suggested that Shiren pursue a career as a mage and recommended the prestigious Alphea's Magic Academy, one of the kingdom's most respected institutions. The idea of enrolling at such an esteemed school was exciting, but the family head was quick to explain that magic schools only admitted nobility, making it impossible for Shiren to attend unless his status were elevated. He then proposed a solution. Shiren could be adopted into the Ojin family, thereby granting him the noble status required to attend Alphea's Magic Academy. Shiren's parents were stunned by this proposition, especially when the family head explained that this adoption would only be a formality, a way to bypass the restrictions of the academy. Shiren's identity as their son would remain unchanged, but his prospects would be greatly expanded. The idea of their son becoming a noble filled them with a mix of awe and fear. It was an opportunity that no one in their position could ever hope for, but it also felt like they were being asked to give up something they couldn't easily part with. As Shiren listened to the conversation unfold, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental would be lost if he agreed to the adoption. The family head, ever the strategist, pressed on, suggesting that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. His grandfather, on the other hand, expressed his frustration at Shiren's stubbornness, trying to make him understand that sometimes sacrifices had to be made for success. But Shiren stood his ground. He calmly explained that his dreams were not something he could sever from the roots that had nurtured him. His parents were his foundation, and to turn his back on them would be like abandoning the very soil that had allowed him to grow. He made it clear that he would rather live as a commoner than become a noble at the cost of his family. The room fell silent for a moment as Shiren's father, overcome with emotion, lowered his head and begged the Ojins to accept his son as their adoptive child. His voice trembled with the weight of his plea, but Shiren's resolve was unwavering. He looked to his father, his heart heavy with the knowledge of the sacrifice that was being asked of him. But he knew deep down that no honor, no title, no amount of power could replace the love and support his parents had given him. Shiren was left in shock at the words coming from his father. Vincent, with a sorrowful head hung low, revealed that Shiren was not his biological son but a child they had received through a fortunate twist of fate. He acknowledged that Shiren was different from them in many ways, especially in his noble bearing, which made him stand out. Vincent expressed that, as Shiren's parents, they could not bear a child of their own and that it seemed only fitting for him to be adopted by a noble family, thus reaching his rightful place. The family had listened carefully, but Vincent's words seemed to intensify the disbelief of everyone in the room. Shiren's appearance was noticeably different from his parents', leading to suspicions that he might be of noble origin. However, this revelation felt like a sharp blow to Shiren's heart, as it seemed to signify that his father was, in a sense, giving up on him. Shiren's shock and anger boiled over as he demanded to know why his father hadn't spoken of this sooner, questioning the decision to hide such an important truth from him. Vincent, deeply remorseful, admitted that he had kept it a secret to avoid burdening his son. But now that Shiren was older, he felt it was time to tell him the truth. However, Shiren, although hurt, confessed that he had already suspected it all along. The reason he hadn't brought it up earlier was that, like most people, he wished for the simplicity of having one true set of parents. He didn't want to be abandoned by his parents, only to have 6 different ones instead. Vincent, though pained by his son's words, explained that his desire was never to make Shiren give up on his dreams. He only wanted him to have the best opportunities, ones he could never offer as a commoner. As Vincent held Shiren's hands in his trembling grasp, it became clear that the pain of possibly losing his son was more than he could bear. Shiren, equally emotional, cried out, accusing his father of abandoning him twice, once through the secret of his parentage and again by considering his adoption into nobility. It was a painful moment, filled with sorrow and regret, as Vincent repeatedly apologized and expressed how much Shiren meant to him. The family head and Shiren's grandfather, though initially observing the scene with reserved expressions, couldn't help but empathize with the difficulty of parenthood, realizing that even the best intentions could sometimes lead to unintended harm. The conversation turned back to the possibility of Shiren attending the prestigious Alphea's Magic Academy. While the family had acknowledged the difficulties in securing special consideration for Shiren's enrollment, He also hinted at the possibility of using connections to make it happen. Shiren's grandfather, known for his stubbornness, hinted that he might be able to apply his old methods to force a solution, using his influence and experience to navigate the bureaucracy. Though the family head was initially skeptical, he remembered a past debt that his old friend owed him, which might serve as leverage. Despite his reluctance, he conceded that the issue could be approached in a different way, and the matter would not be as impossible as it first seemed. 3 days passed, and Shiren's family remained at the Ojent household, with Shiren's father still feeling the weight of his earlier words. Shiren, though grateful for the hospitality, was unsure how long they would be able to stay without overstaying their welcome. His worry grew as he considered the future and his own place within the noble world. Meanwhile, Ryan, who was soon to leave for the Swordsmanship Academy, spent his last moments with Shiren, struggling to keep his emotions in check. Shiren, despite his own turmoil, tried to console Ryan, encouraging him to stay strong and reminding him that they would meet again. The farewell was emotional, as Ryan, overcome with tears, wished that he could join Shiren at the Magic Academy. Shiren, knowing the uncertainty of his own future, promised to stay in touch and assured Ryan that they would continue their friendship no matter the distance. As the two boys parted ways, Ryan made a heartfelt promise to become the strongest knight to protect Shiren, while Shiren, in turn, vowed to become a powerful mage. Their bond was solidified in that moment, and although they were parting ways, their connection was unbreakable. Riene, observing the emotional exchange, thought of Shiren as a peculiar yet incredibly thoughtful individual. She had initially seen him as just a younger sibling, but now she realized how deeply he cared for his family and friends. Her words of encouragement echoed in Shiren's mind as he prepared to return home with his parents. In the midst of the farewell, Shiren and his family traveled in separate carriages, side by side, as they made their way to their respective destinations. As they passed through the snow-covered landscape, Ryan, still crying, called out to Shiren from his carriage, urging him to destroy all obstacles at the Magic Academy when he arrived. Shiren, with equal fervor, shouted back his encouragement, promising to do the same when it was his turn. The exchange between these two passionate young men, filled with promise and determination, marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one that would forever alter the course of the world they inhabited. Meanwhile, the family head, sitting with his old friend, the headmaster of the Alphea's Magic Academy, continued to negotiate the matter of Shiren's special consideration. Despite their long history of friendship, the headmaster remained hesitant, knowing that the Academy's policies were strict, and such exceptions were rarely made. However, after a lengthy discussion, it became clear that Shiren's unique abilities and potential would likely make him a worthy candidate for admission, even without the noble lineage that the Academy typically required. The headmaster, though still skeptical, began to see the merit in the old man's arguments, and the possibility of an exception seemed more likely. After all, as the grandfather pointed out, Shiren reminded him of a younger version of the headmaster himself, a truly rare and extraordinary individual, despite not fitting the traditional mold. The headmaster, now intrigued, recalled a description of a child with blonde hair and blue eyes, a striking resemblance to the young Shiren. He soon realized that this child was indeed the one who had caught the attention of many in the kingdom, and his potential might be far greater than anyone had anticipated. Shiren's arrival at Alphea's wizard school marked the beginning of a transformative journey in his life. The day he stepped onto the academy grounds, he was filled with a mix of awe and uncertainty. It wasn't just the grandeur of the school or its imposing structures that struck him. It was the very atmosphere itself, charged with the energy of magic that seemed to hum in the air. This was a place where power wasn't just spoken about, it was lived and breathed daily. Shiren had come a long way from his modest beginnings, and now, with the headmaster leading him, he found himself entering a world that had once seemed out of reach. From the moment the headmaster greeted him, there was a sense of familiarity between them, a quiet recognition that went beyond mere formalities. Shiren could tell that the headmaster, though a figure of authority, wasn't just a teacher to him. There was a shared history that stretched back to their previous encounters, though at the time, Shiren was little more than a distant, unremarkable boy to the headmaster. Now, as they walked together through the school, the older man saw in Shiren what had been right in front of him all along: potential, raw, unrefined, but potent. Shiren's ability to open the spirit zone, something that many would have struggled with for years, was just the first of many signs that he was destined for greatness. As the headmaster spoke, Shiren couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for the time that had been lost. Had he only been recognized sooner, had he received the proper guidance at a younger age, where could he be now? The headmaster's regret was palpable. Still, he had chosen to put those feelings behind him and focus on what Shiren could become in the future. It was late, yes, but not too late. There was a place for Shiren at Alphea's wizard school, and he was determined to help him succeed, no matter how difficult the journey ahead might be. The academy was unlike anything Shiren had ever experienced. As they made their way through the halls, he was struck by the displays of magic all around him. In the beginner classes, students were effortlessly levitating, their bodies floating as if gravity had no dominion over them. Others manipulated objects with nothing but a flick of their hands or a whispered incantation. Magic, something that had seemed so distant and unattainable to Shiren before, was now a tangible, vibrant force that surrounded him. The wonder in his eyes was impossible to conceal as he observed the ease with which these young mages controlled the elements and bent reality to their will. He couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. Could he, too, learn to command such power? However, the deeper Shiren ventured into the academy, the more he realized just how much he had to learn. The headmaster led him through higher-ranked classrooms, where the atmosphere was markedly different. The students here were older, more experienced, and their conversations were filled with complex discussions about magical theory. Shiren overheard one group discussing an experiment to amplify sound, while another debated the most efficient ways to use energy for controlling temperature. The language they used, terms, formulas, and concepts, was completely foreign to him. It was as if he were hearing a language he knew but couldn't quite understand. It was humbling, a stark reminder of how much he still had to grasp. Yet, at the same time, it fueled his determination. He couldn't let himself fall behind. He had to catch up, to understand this world that was now his. Despite feeling out of his depth, Shiren also found himself intrigued by the people he encountered. Some students seemed absorbed in their studies, while others were more casual, throwing themselves into experiments and projects without much concern for the potential consequences. In one hallway, a loud explosion echoed as a student's experiment went awry, sending a burst of smoke and debris into the air. It seemed that no one paid it much mind. The headmaster, ever composed, simply addressed the situation with a few calm words, giving the student advice on how to fix the mistake. To Shiren, this nonchalance was both shocking and enlightening. In this place, where magic flowed freely and mistakes were common, nothing was as serious as it seemed. Everything was part of the learning process. As Shiren moved further into the academy, he found himself reflecting on his own journey. His family's sacrifices weighed heavily on him. His father, a hunter by trade, had given up the opportunity to move to the city, a decision motivated by pride and a desire to keep their family's honor intact. Despite the Ogent family's offers of financial support, his father refused to accept any assistance, believing that a hunter's roots should remain in the mountains and the fields. Shiren understood now why his father had done it. It wasn't just about the money, it was about their family's dignity. His father wanted him to stand on his own, to make something of himself without relying on the favor of others. And now, standing in the heart of this magical school, Shiren was determined to prove that his father's faith in him was not misplaced. The journey through the academy was a mixture of awe, confusion, and self-doubt. But through it all, Shiren's resolve only grew stronger. This was a place where magic was alive, where the boundaries of possibility were pushed every day. It was a place where he could learn, grow, and eventually master the powers that had once seemed so distant. But more than that, it was a place where he could shape his own destiny. The headmaster had already seen something in him, potential, a spark that could one day ignite into greatness. But Shiren knew that potential meant nothing if he didn't work hard to cultivate it. As he stood in the academy's halls, Shiren couldn't help but think of all the challenges that lay ahead. The competition would be fierce, the expectations high, but he was ready. This was just the beginning of his journey. What he learned here, the friends he made, and the obstacles he overcame would shape the man he was becoming. The academy had given him a chance, and he was determined not to waste it. Whatever the future held, Shiren knew one thing for sure: he would not back down. He would fight, study, and persevere, determined to carve out a future where he would one day stand as a mage among the greatest. Shiren's excitement was palpable as he observed the students around him, all casually using magic with ease. What struck him as peculiar seemed entirely normal to those who were immersed in this world. The magic that had once felt so foreign and distant to him was now an everyday part of life, and it left him feeling both awestruck and somewhat out of place. The headmaster, sensing his curiosity, explained that the area they were heading to was a bit different from the rest, a high-ranking area for students in classes 7 through 4. Shiren couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere shifted as they approached. The students in these advanced classes were around his age, yet they carried themselves with an air of confidence and focus that seemed beyond his own reach. Their discussions were filled with terms and concepts that made no sense to him. He overheard one pair of students engaged in a passionate debate about energy manipulation, discussing whether a large amount of energy could bring the temperature of the atmosphere below freezing, and if condensing a refrigerant would be more efficient. They even talked about redirecting the time scale instead of energy to avoid accelerating a reverse reaction. Cheyenne found himself lost in their conversation, his mind struggling to grasp the concepts they were tossing around. He couldn't understand why their words, though spoken in the same language, felt like a foreign tongue. It was as if they were discussing an entirely different world, one where he didn't yet belong. Just as he began to feel overwhelmed by his confusion, a sudden bang interrupted his thoughts. From the cloud of smoke that filled the hallway, a student emerged, coughing and brushing off the remnants of the explosion. He cheerfully greeted the headmaster, explaining that his experiment to amplify sound had gone awry. The headmaster, unfazed, calmly assessed the situation, suggesting that the issue lay in the input-output balance and advised the student to check the uniformity of the electricity. Cheyenne watched in amazement as the headmaster interacted with the students. No one seemed concerned by the explosion, nor did anyone appear to be in a rush to fix the problem. It was almost as though accidents like these were commonplace, and the atmosphere around him felt oddly indifferent. It struck Cheyenne that, in this place, mistakes were not met with panic but with quiet problem solving. The sense of urgency or stress he had been accustomed to back home was absent here, replaced instead by a calm, almost detached approach to learning and failure. As he walked through the halls, surrounded by the hum of magic and the soft murmur of students engaged in their complex studies, Cheyenne couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into an entirely new world, one where magic, knowledge, and the way people thought about both were so different from anything he had ever known. The school seemed to exist in a space where the ordinary was extraordinary, and where the impossible was simply another challenge to overcome. The more he observed, the more Cheyenne realized that he had a long way to go before he could even begin to understand this world fully. But at that moment, he knew one thing for certain. He was determined to find his place in it, no matter how out of his depth he felt. Cheyenne stood before the notice board, the sheer scale of its significance dawning on him. His eyes traveled over the long list of names and rankings that mapped the intermediate class hierarchy. At the very top, one name stood out like a beacon: Amy Carmes. The revelation hit him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just any name but one that represented the pinnacle of talent within the academy. A first-class noble, Amy Carmes had claimed the highest position, embodying what it meant to excel beyond ordinary expectations. For a moment, Cheyenne's thoughts raced as he processed the gravity of what he was seeing. Everyone on that list, he realized, had achieved heights of skill and recognition that rivaled his own innate potential. Yet, Amy was different. She was the best among them, a symbol of the standard he now aspired to reach. The realization sparked a fire in Cheyenne's heart, igniting a determination he hadn't fully felt until this moment. The rankings weren't just numbers, they were a challenge, a call to action. He resolved to start from the very beginning, rebuilding his knowledge and skills from the ground up. In this hallowed place of learning, he would push himself to climb the ranks, to see his name alongside those of the most talented students. It wasn't just about recognition, it was about proving to himself that he belonged in this world. As Cheyenne lingered by the board, lost in thought, voices in the distance broke his concentration. Someone called out a name that made his heart skip a beat: Amy. Could it be her? The Amy Carmes at the top of the rankings. His curiosity got the better of him, and he turned to see who it was. What he saw left him frozen in place. Standing a short distance away was a girl with fiery red hair that seemed to blaze against the backdrop of the academy's grandeur. His breath caught in his throat, and an old memory resurfaced with startling clarity. He was 12 years old again, wandering the streets of a bustling city. The memory unfolded vividly. Violent men had cornered him, their intentions clear and malicious. In that desperate moment, he had unleashed a torrent of wind magic, a power he didn't fully understand, sending his attackers flying. Amid the chaos, a red-haired girl had appeared, her eyes blazing with both anger and confusion. She had demanded to know how a commoner like him could wield such magic. The weight of that encounter had stayed with him, and now, years later, here she was. Amy Carmes, the same girl who had challenged him in the past, now stood as the academy's brightest star. Cheyenne's chest tightened, and an overwhelming need to remain unnoticed gripped him. He turned his back quickly, his thoughts racing. "Please don't recognize me," he pleaded silently. Nearby, Amy's companion chattered on, oblivious to Cheyenne's internal struggle. Her words floated toward him, speculating about Cheyenne's appearance and status, but he barely registered them. Amy, however, seemed to hesitate. She stared at Shiren's retreating figure, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, though she couldn't place it. Her friend teased her relentlessly, but Amy brushed it off, her mind lingering on the feeling of familiarity Shiren stirred in her. As the girls walked away, whispers about Amy filled the air. Her reputation as the Academy's model student was undeniable. She was admired not just for her talent but also for her poise and presence. Countless confessions from students of all ages had been rebuffed by her, further adding to her allure. Yet, in the shadow of her illustrious reputation, Shiren knew a truth that none of them did, a connection to her past that bound them in a way neither fully understood. The headmaster's voice drew Shiren from his thoughts, guiding him toward the next stop on their tour, the Academy's third test site. The room was abuzz with activity. Young students gathered in small groups as they prepared for evaluations. The air felt charged with anticipation as one child stepped forward, standing within a circle marked by intricate symbols and letters. The headmaster explained the purpose of the test to Shiren, describing how the spirit zone revealed a student's magical potential. Each element of the test, the size of the zone, its dominant color, and other characteristics, offered insights into the individual's strengths and disposition. Shiren watched intently as the child answered the teacher's questions with remarkable confidence. His responses impressed the evaluators, especially when he described his zone as washed in red, signaling a divergent type with high energy and activity levels. The teachers whispered amongst themselves, noting the increasing quality of students with each passing year. The headmaster took this opportunity to explain the significance of divergent and convergent types, further deepening Shiren's understanding of the Academy's rigorous standards. Then it was Shiren's turn. His name was called, and a hush fell over the room. The headmaster placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, encouraging him to remain calm and confident. Despite this, whispers from the teachers reached his ears. They speculated about his background, some questioning whether his admission was based on merit or connections, while others expressed curiosity about the headmaster's belief in his potential. Shiren stepped into the circle, his heart pounding. Closing his eyes, he focused on entering the spirit zone. The moment he did, an otherworldly sensation enveloped him. Symbols and letters floated around him, pulsating with a rhythm he couldn't quite place. The teachers began their questions, starting with the farthest number he could perceive. Shiren hesitated, then replied, 3.14. His answer sent shockwaves through the room. The teachers exchanged incredulous glances. The number suggested a spirit zone that exceeded their set parameters, stretching beyond 30 meters, an extraordinary feat. The questions continued, each revealing more of Shiren's exceptional abilities. When asked about the dominant color of his zone, he described it as entirely blue, indicating a convergent type. The teachers were astonished. A zone of such immense size paired with the control and resilience of a convergent type was unheard of. The final question asked him to count the floating spheres within his zone. Shiren didn't need to count individually, he felt the number instinctively. There are 867, he said. The room fell silent, the teachers left utterly dumbfounded. Their disbelief was palpable. Shiren's results defied all expectations. The headmaster, too, was stunned. As he looked at Shiren, he couldn't help but marvel at the boy's unparalleled potential. For Shiren, this moment was transformative. It marked the beginning of a journey into the unknown, a chance to prove that he could thrive in a world that demanded greatness. Little did he know, his presence at the Academy would leave a mark far deeper than anyone could foresee. The final question tasked Shiren with determining the number of floating spheres within his zone. He didn't need to count them one by one, he simply sensed the total. There are 867, he stated confidently. The room was enveloped in silence as the teachers stared in shock, struggling to process his extraordinary response. Even the headmaster, equally taken aback, found himself marveling at Shiren's unmatched potential. The headmaster watched Shiren with a deepening sense of concern. The boy's display was not just impressive, it bordered on extraordinary, perhaps even dangerous. When asked about his perception of the spirit zone's temperature, Shiren had calmly stated that it felt quite cold, to the point of being icy. The simplicity of his response belied the complexity of what it implied, leaving the examiners with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Once the test concluded, Shiren and the other new students were politely ushered out of the chamber. They were instructed to wait while the teachers convened to deliberate on their placements. The heavy doors shut behind them, and the room was left in a charged silence as the examiners exchanged glances. It wasn't long before the deliberations began in earnest. The teachers' initial responses were a mix of astonishment and skepticism. One of them, an older instructor with a stern demeanor, broke the silence with a dry laugh. "What an interesting student," he remarked, leaning back in his chair. Another chimed in, still processing the data. Exactly. How could a 17-year-old possess a spirit zone with a diameter exceeding 30 meters? That kind of capability should be unheard of, even among prodigies. Their astonishment only deepened as they reviewed the finer details of Shiren's test results. Not only was the size of his spirit zone remarkable, but its density was calculated at an extraordinary 86.7%. Typically, as the size of a spirit zone increased, its density would naturally decrease, creating a balance between reach and intensity. Yet Shiren's spirit zone defied this norm, maintaining an exceptional density without any evidence of artificial intensification. The lack of any known training regimen or formal instruction made the feat even more perplexing. One teacher, a woman known for her analytical approach, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. To achieve a pure concentration like that without any enhancement techniques, it's almost like he's been training in isolation for years. Could he be some hermit or monk who spent his life honing this ability in the wilderness? The incredulity in the room was palpable, and one of the younger instructors, still grappling with the implications, couldn't contain his doubts. Could he have lied? He blurted out. The suggestion lingered in the air, causing several of his peers to shift uncomfortably. Think about it. A 30-meter spirit zone with 90% density from a 17-year-old who claims no magical education. It just doesn't make sense. What if he inflated the numbers somehow to impress us? Before the doubt could spread, another teacher interjected with a calm but firm rebuttal. Mr. Thad, I believe you've forgotten an essential point. Her tone was measured, but her words carried an undeniable authority. There is no reason for a student to lie about their spirit zone capabilities during this test. Admission to a high-ranking class comes with expectations and challenges that could easily overwhelm someone unprepared. Bluffing their way into such a position would only set them up for failure. It's counterproductive, she continued, addressing the others in the room. And more importantly, I think some of us have also forgotten that pi is displayed as an error code in our system. It's a safeguard designed to account for extreme values that exceed our parameters. That student mentioned it with casual precision. It's not the kind of information a mere novice could guess or fabricate just to seek attention. The headmaster, who had been silent up to this point, cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention. His eyes were sharp, reflecting both intrigue and concern. So, he began, his voice deliberate, where do we place him? Shirene Aryan, what would be a fitting environment for someone like him? The question hung in the air, sparking a new wave of debate among the teachers. Some advocated placing Shirene in one of the intermediate classes, reasoning that he could benefit from structured foundational training before being exposed to advanced material. Others suggested that his unique abilities warranted immediate placement in an advanced class, where he could be challenged appropriately and receive instruction tailored to his potential. Yet, beneath their discussions lay an undercurrent of unease. Shirene was an anomaly, one that could either flourish spectacularly or collapse under the weight of expectations. The decision carried implications not just for Shirene but for the school itself. How does an institution designed to nurture exceptional talent handle a student who seemed to transcend even their highest benchmarks? The headmaster leaned back in his chair, his mind churning with possibilities. He recalled the conversation with Clumph Ogent, who had insisted that Shirene was no ordinary talent. While the boy's performance validated that claim, it also raised new questions. Was Shirene's ability a gift or a potential threat? Could it be harnessed responsibly, or would it spiral out of control? As the deliberations continued, one thing became clear: Shirene Aryan was not just another student. He was a catalyst, one whose journey would likely reshape not only his own future but that of the academy itself.